Greetings, everyone. I'm Romy Hill, and this is the last installment of the lives for my autumn shawl along in 2021. And this is Bright October. You can see it here behind me. So I just wanted to welcome you and thank you for being with me up to this point. I appreciate that you knit my patterns and I love our community. So let's just start by sharing my little demo um, scene here. And so today was the last installment of the pattern, Bright October. Here's like a terrible print of the cover because my printer is running out of ink. And so what was added today was down in number 5 here. So we had one chart added today, that was chart H. And then the finishing part right here, that's just a little border. And then down at the bottom here, just washing and blocking and weaving in ends. So I wanted to go over really quickly just the last chart. It's nothing really new. So you've seen this before in the rest of the patterns. So I'm not going to spend tons of time on it. So this is just the bottom part here of the diamond. And it's up in the border here. If you look at this, the little picture of me up in your right hand, here you can see just the diamond shapes up in the border. So that's just the last part of that. And it ends with this color 2 row up here. So it's color 4 and color 2. So once that is done, we get into the border, and it's a fairly small border. I had a couple of people ask me about row 3, if that really is purled, and it is purled. This part is not garter stitch, so it will have just a little tiny bit of curl to it, but not much really because of the way that it's bound off. And if you're using coastal yarn, it really keeps its block really, really well. So you won't be able to see much of anything here. I'm going to just put this under my camera here. So it really doesn't curl. That's what it looks like on the back side. And it does not curl. So do not fear. Just going to stick that back up there. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about my favorite bind off. It's the stretchy bind off. So you can see right in here it says to execute stretchy bind off while working the following. So that means that we're going to follow these instructions, and while following these instructions, we'll be working the stretchy bind off. And you can find the instructions for that over in the abbreviations. So you can see right here, it's just to work 2 stitches, and then you're going to replace those 2 stitches on the left needle and knit 2 together through the back loop. And then for the rest of the row, you'll just be working 1 extra stitch. And then every time you have those 2 stitches, you're going to bind one of them off. So it's really simple and it's really stretchy. So I've never known anybody be able to bind off with a stretchy bind off too tight. Even if you're a super tight knitter, it's going to be really difficult for you to bind off too tight with this. So that's one of the reasons that I really love it. It blocks out really beautifully. So I just have a few little stitches here, and I'm going to show you on this what it's going to look like. So I'm just going to work row 4 here. Obviously I don't have as many stitches, but I hope this will fit under the camera so you can see it better. Okay, so it's going to start with knitting 2 stitches through the back loop. So there are my 2 stitches through the back loop. I'm going to replace those onto my left needle. and then I'm going to knit two together through the back loop. So this is actually just decreasing out all the way across the row. So my next stitch is knit. And to get going faster on this, I always leave my needle in when I put my stitches back on my left needle. I'm always going to be leaving my right needle in the back there, and it's all set up to work those two together through the back loop. So I'm going to work a stitch and then put those two stitches back on my left needle while my right needle is in there, and knit two together through the back loop. Okay, so you can get going really fast on this. This is an excellent bind off for many reasons. One is for shawls. It's perfect for shawls because it's easy to block out. It's also excellent for necklines and for socks and for anything that you want to look nice and neat, but you also want some nice stretch to it. So this is an excellent bind off for many things. And if you like I have had problems before binding off too tight on necklines or making it look too sloppy, this is the perfect bind off for you. And when we're finished, you'll be able to see how nice and neat it is. So on the last one, I just slipped that stitch over and just bind off the regular way. And now I'm going to fasten off. I usually just break my yarn. So I have my little bound off swatch here, and you can see how neat that looks. And then on the front, it looks neat as well. So note that this is bound off on the wrong side on the shawl. So once your shawl is bound off, it's time to block it. So I do not weave in or sew in my ends until after the shawl is blocked. And this is because it's possible to sew your ends in too tight and then have a really difficult time blocking it out. So pretty much the most difficult areas of a shawl are the cast on and the bind off. Those need to be nice and loose, and particularly the bind off, especially on a shawl like this. It's at kind of a larger gauge, so when you block it, even though there's a lot of just mosaic and plain stitches, you'll notice that if you bind off too tight, it will be really obvious. So excellent bind off. It takes anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times the amount of yarn that you will need for a row. So keep that in mind when you're doing your calculations. And as before, I suggest using a yarn scale. So yarn scales are your friend, especially in this kind of thing. So there are a couple of people who are talking about the mosaic versus um, the just the plain reverse stockinette. So you may find that your gauge changes a little bit between mosaic and plain reverse stockinette. That's possible with lace as well. So some people get tighter, some people get looser. If you've noticed a little bit of a change, and particularly if you get looser, I'm sorry, tighter with the reverse stockinette at the edge, you want to make sure that this is definitely knit looser. So go ahead and go up a needle size if you need to, because that edging is really important for it to block out nicely. So let me just put this back up on my trusty mannequin here. Okay, so once you have your shawl all bound off, I like to wash my woolens in kookaburra. So you can see I'm holding it up in the little picture up in the right-hand corner. I love the way this stuff smells, and not many stores carry it anymore. So I have been known to hunt it down all over the internet just so I could find it because it smells so amazing. When when your knits are dry, I just bury my face in it. So you can find it at Knit Picks, and I haven't been able to find it anywhere else lately, but Knit Picks is a good source. It's just so delicious. I love the smell of it. Okay, so when you're when you have used your wool wash, and here I have a little tiny shawl to demonstrate on. You want to roll your shawl, your well-rinsed shawl, up into a towel. And I like to walk on my knits. And once they're rolled up in the towel, because that's knits, not nets. So I like to walk on the towel that my knits are rolled up into, because it's gets all the extra water out. So once that's done, I take it out, and I like to use blocking wires to block. So these are my favorite. I actually cut a couple of these so I could carry them around with me when I teach. So I haven't been anywhere teaching lately, but these are TIG, TIG welding rod. So TIG, okay. I think I have my sound back now. So sorry if you couldn't hear me for a moment. Um, I'm having all kinds of weird technical difficulties today. I don't know. The technical gods are not smiling upon me this afternoon. Anyway, so these are TIG, TIG welding rod, and I got this at Ace Hardware probably many years ago, 15 or 16 years ago. This is about 14 gauge, and it's solid stainless steel. So um, this is not stainless steel coated or plated. And I find that these have lasted a really long time. They're fantastic. I don't have to worry about low grade stainless or any type of plating wearing off. So I love them a lot. Um, and then I have my T-pins that I use as well. So these are nickel plated T-pins. Um, And let me tell you why. I know that there are some of you who are using naturally dyed yarns for this shawl. So if you are using naturally dyed yarns, you need to be particularly careful about the materials, any type of metal um, that touches your shawl when it's wet. So in other words, if you have any type of T-pin and the plating is wearing thin or it's not very good grade stainless, it can rust, but it can also continue the dyeing process. So you don't want to have little spots on your shawl. So I suggest whatever you want to use with your naturally dyed yarns, make sure to wet a piece of the yarn that you've used and wrap it around the pins or the blocking wires or whatever you're going to use for your blocking, and make sure that it does not continue the dyeing process. I've had that happen a couple of times. So where I had dark blue spots on a gold shawl or purple spots on a pink shawl. And that's just the metal kind of keeping the dyeing going. So, okay. So the other thing you can use, and these are very cool. I like them a lot. Knit blockers. So that's what the box looks like. It's just a purple box. I love them, but you have to have lots of them because if you want to get a good block, you need these all the way around the outside. So it can get pretty expensive, although they are fantastic. So your mileage may vary. You may want to have a large collection of them. I have 3 boxes. Um, they're rather pricey though. Okay, so I'm just going to show you what it looks like. I'm going to pretend that my little tiny shawl here is wet because my little tiny shawl, not Charles. I'm just going to pretend that that's wet. I don't want to have any water up here because knowing me, terrible things would happen. So let's just start here. I'm just going to pretend this is a large wet shawl. Okay, so when I block, I use these little blocking mats, and these particular ones are from Knit Picks, but they are available all over everywhere. So you can get them at Amazon. You can get little mats at Costco, all over. So when I have a shawl laid out and I clip my mats together, I always center along a seam of the mats so that I can kind of eyeball how big the shawl needs to be stretched to. So for instance, if I put this on a seam, I might stretch it out 3 tiles in either direction. And then that helps me just sort of, without measuring, kind of figure out if I'm blocking the shawl correctly. So I generally will start at one end or the other, just along the top. And I want to have a really straight edge. So I'm just going to weave my blocking rod in and out here along the edge. So I don't want to skip any of these rows because that's going to give me picots. I do not want picots. I don't want picots on the edge of this here. I want this to be a nice straight edge. So I'm just going to go all the way across here. And again, I have not woven in any ends. That's going to be my last step. So it's just going to go all the way across. Now, for the larger shawl, you're going to have to use more blocking wires than this. So as long as you weave them in and out carefully, when you can just start weaving another one in and out as you go along, just pin them in place so that there's no lump where you have changed wires. And you can see here, I kind of missed one of the rows, so I'm going to put an extra pin there to hold it. So just so it doesn't come up with a scallop. Okay. Now I always make sure my blocking wires, one uh, on either side comes out at the point here because that makes it easier to pin down. So now I'm just going to go along the bind off. So I just want to make sure that everything is nice and straight. And I don't generally start pinning anything out until I have my blocking wires woven in. Now I'm just going to go on from the other side, I'm going to start up at the top here. No, I won't. My hand's in the way, so I'll start at the bottom so you can see it better. Okay. So I'm just going to weave in and out along the bottom here. And again, you're going to have to use at least 2 blocking wires along each side, possibly more. As long as you pin them down, it will be fine. You won't have any lumps or anything along the edging. Okay. So I have I have this all started for you here. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a pin in right in the middle. And this is exactly how I block my larger shawls. It's just really small so you can see it underneath the camera here. And I'm going to pull this down right where those 2 wires meet. So that's my start. And I like to do each of the corners first. Don't worry about pulling things tight. Your shawl is going to be very wet, well, damp. I mean, not wet, I suppose, because you'll have walked all the water out, but it's going to be damp. And damp knitting is much stronger than dry knitting. So you can really pull it and block it, um, block it drastically. Block, it's a heavy block. Okay, so once that's done, I'm going to go along inside here, and you'll notice that when you have a larger shawl, that these are going to kind of be pulling in a little bit. That's okay. Just kind of pull it back out and pin it out. So again, I kind of missed a row up here. So when I pin it out, I'm just going to make sure that I pin right through that row there so that I don't get a little lump along the top edge. And sometimes you're going to have to sort of adjust things a little bit. Sometimes larger shawls, you're just going to have to take some of the pins out and kind of pull it down a little bit more. You'll find that you'll have a lot more leeway in here, and you'll be releasing the pins and pulling it down a few more times. That's totally fine. One of my test knitters actually blocks her shawls so tight that she puts weights on the blocking mats to keep them from folding up. So that's kind of an example of how tight you can block it. So once this is done, if you live in a kind of a humid climate, you should have no problems getting this all pinned out. If you live in a drier climate, sometimes you're going to have to just spray it with a little bit of water if your blocking is taking too long. So once this is totally dry, like completely bone dry, you're going to unpin it. And this has a single, so I'm going to show you how I weave on my ends on my little swatch here. But you can see here the ends are still kind of out there. Okay, so I'm just going to move this, and I'm going to show you how I weave in my ends. So here's my little tiny piece of blocked stuff. I'm looking for my needle that I got out to sew in my ends because it's that kind of day. Here we go. I got out the blunt one and not the sharp one. So this is a shawl. So I like to use a sharp tapestry needle. And that is because I actually sew in my ends. I don't weave them in like I might for a sweater that has a much tighter gauge. So here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to split my plies. This is 4-ply yarn. So I'm splitting my yarn in half. And I'm just going to move all the way down that ply. This is what I'm going to end up with. So 2 strands. This takes a little bit longer, but it's well worth it, especially when you've used a yarn that is a superwash or just a non-feltable yarn, and also you're knitting it at a larger gauge. So this is going to help your ends stay in much better. So this is the back of my knitting, and I have this on my sharp needle here. So you can see it's got a good point to it. And I'm actually going to sew this in through the strands of yarn. So you can maybe see here that it's going right through the center. I want to make sure that I don't pull it too tight. So that's one of the reasons that I didn't do this before I blocked my shawl. So I'm just going to kind of check as I'm going along, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not making it too tight. So as I go along, I do actually follow some of the stitches here, and that is because that makes it stretchier. So I don't want to do just a complete straight line in there. I'm going to follow these stitches around, but instead of just having another strand of yarn there, I am going to sew it through the center of the yarn here. And that is incredibly helpful in hiding the little ends and keeping them from coming out. So let's go through this one again. So once I've done that, I usually come out here. I'm just going to go back in kind of the way that I came. Not exactly. I don't want this to come out. And again, I'm making sure that as I'm doing this, it's still stretchy. I also, on slick yarn and superwash yarn, I like to make a little slip knot so that the end will not come out. I don't like using, there are fray check products, and I don't like using glue in my knitwear, so I use the little tiny slip knot instead. So once that is done, I'm just going to trim away my end and trim it fairly close. And then this end is going to get a different treatment. It's going to go up along the side, so it doesn't go in the same area and doesn't create a really bulky strand along here. So I'm just going to go in here. It's a really great way to tidy up your edges too, right at the end here. It's always a little bit sloppy. So I always go up the side to kind of tidy everything up. And I still am making sure that I'm not pulling it too tight. And again, I'm just going to do like a little tiny slip knot and sew that part in. And I'm going to go back the other way. Okay. Okay, so before I cut this off, I stretch it a little bit and just clip it. Okay, so you can see it a little bit if you look really close, but hopefully no one is going to be that close to you. Um, that would be kind of weird if someone were up there fondling your knitwear, but you never know. So on the front side, this is what you're going to see. It's nice and clean. There are no ends sticking out. So it takes a little bit longer to split the plies like that, but I think it's really worth it. Okay, so I think that is what I have today. I don't have any questions from anybody, and I didn't have any questions earlier today, so no one asked me to follow up with anything on this live. So that's what we have. If you enjoyed this, I hope you had a great time. If you enjoyed it and you like the lace and the mosaic, I want to suggest another shawl of mine, and this is called Semi Dimma. So this one has 7 colors and was one of my favorite knits. Got some texture up top and then mosaic, and then it has a lace panel and a lot of mosaic through here. Um, it's a really fun knit. And if you look on Ravelry, you'll see lots of people have knit it and they've used all these different amazing colorways. Just like gorgeous. Everything looks completely different. Some of them you can barely tell that it's the same shawl. So, anyway, thank you so much for being with me through this. Um, I apologize. This was supposed to take place over the summer, but we were evacuated. So next summer, we'll be back to the summer knit along schedule. I really enjoy doing this in the summer. And I hope to see you again next year. And I also hope to see you for my mystery knit along, and that's going to come in spring of 2022. So thank you all so much. I have enjoyed hanging out with you, and I hope to see you this Saturday on our Zoom Hangout. Thanks and take care. Bye bye.